You're listening to the B2B Growth Show, a podcast dedicated to helping B2B executives achieve explosive growth. Whether you're looking for techniques and strategies or tools and resources, you've come to the right place. I'm James Carberry.
And I'm Jonathan Green.
Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to the B2B Growth Show. Today we are joined by Brandon Metcalf. Brandon is the co-founder and president of Talent Rover. Brandon, welcome to the show.
Hey, Jonathan. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you here. We're excited to talk to you today, sort of tap into your area of expertise. We are going to be talking about how business leaders can make better software decisions, which I think our listeners are going to get a lot out of. But before we do, Brandon, maybe you can tell us a little about yourself and what you and the Talent Rover team are up to these days.
Yeah, so my background, basically, I came out of the staffing and recruiting industry. Prior to that, I was in banking, but most of my career I've been in staffing. And really, I got frustrated with all of the technology that either we were looking at using in the system or in the industry, or that was just available to be purchased. So came up with this crazy idea of why don't we create a better software for that space? And that's how Talent Rover was created. So what Talent Rover really is, we're essentially the operating system for external staffing or recruiting firms. So think like temporary staffing, headhunters, all of those types of things. It's about a $460 billion industry, I think, globally. So it's a massive space. The software is pretty terrible for the space. So we definitely found the niche, and we focus on really everything from the initial sales conversation through all the candidate recruitment and placing pieces all the way through producing invoices.
That's perfect. Well, and as you said, you guys, you especially know about, what sort of makes business software work or not work. So that's, a huge part of why we were able to bring you on today and talk about these 5 things to consider before buying business software. So, Brandon, I'm going to kind of let you take it away. Are we just going to start off jumping into number 1? Know how well your vendor understands the unique challenges of your industry, or is there some preface, some sort of groundwork we need to lay ahead of time?
No, I think let's just get into it. And I think, that first question is actually the genesis of why my company even exists today. Staffing and recruiting, you may think is just like traditional corporate recruiting, and that any ATS system would meet the demands. But in reality, the staffing and recruiting business is just so different because pretty much everyone's a salesperson. So you're either trying to convince clients to let you work on their job opportunities, or you're trying to convince candidates to take the right job opportunity. So you're tracking all of this information, and then you've got to turn around and be able to do things like timesheets and invoicing and all of these other operational pieces. So, what I was faced with when I was on the other side of the desk, when I was actually in the recruiting side of it, was most of the technology that was available was built for corporate recruiters. And they really understand the internal corporate HRIS space well, but it didn't translate really to what we were trying to do. So we would have to look at a variety of different systems that would be piecemealed together, that really wouldn't talk to each other. And it just led to a lot of dysfunction and a lot of disorganization and ultimately a lot of frustration for everyone. So I think that experience is not unique to the staffing industry. I do think the staffing industry historically, though, has been behind on technology, just like HR in general. But I think so many industries, it's the same thing, where can you really find a software out there that's built for what you do or the space you play in? And if you have to piecemeal 10 systems together, I think you're asking for a lot of trouble.
Yeah. Now, are there, I don't want to put you on the spot, but do you think that there are maybe some key questions that you can ask to get to the heart of this matter, finding out, does my vendor understand my unique challenges of my industry, or is that just kind of very specific from buyer to vendor, industry to industry?
I think it ties into some of the other points we're going to go over. But no, I do think you can really get into the weeds with the vendor and talk specific talk and talk, whatever your lingo is in your space to see if they get it. And then I think the proof's in the pudding, right? Asking them for other customers who are in your space who would be using the software just like you'd be using it, and see really what they come up with. And if they can produce those customers, then really take the time to have a conversation with those other customers and say, tell me how you guys use it, what's working, what's not working. I think for me, I know I've been in that situation doing that exact thing, and it actually steered me away from purchasing a couple different solutions that were out there.
Mm-hmm. So, all right, well, let's talk about number 2 then. Is there an equal amount of value to both stakeholders and end users? Kind of, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, this is always an interesting one, because I found myself guilty of this in the past, where you come across a software that just seems awesome. It seems like it could do so many different things, and that it can change the business. It can help you out. It can really drive you in a different direction. But my aspirations of what that software would do didn't necessarily align to what the associates would need something to do. It would be like, yeah, that would be a great, nice to have, but it doesn't really help me too much with my daily work. So instead of investing in something that will add 10% of, potential value, why don't we refocus that excitement on a better solution that actually everyone in the organization can take advantage of, versus just some cool new toy, which I think oftentimes you can get sucked into, or I have in the past.
And does that have a lot more to do with sort of intra-company transparency, like communication amongst departments? Is that having an encompassing vision from the executives, from the sort of top down, so that everyone is more aligned, and that can help solve that problem? Or what are you thinking with that?
Yeah, I mean, I can use an example that we faced here recently at Talent Rover with communication tools. So we use Gmail and Google as our primary emailing system and all of that. So of course you get Google Hangouts. And then our VP of Tech, he loves Slack, and his team loves Slack for a lot of really, really good reasons. So they want to use Slack. And then we have other vendors and customers that they're on Microsoft, and they use Skype and Link and all of that. So then it then leads to a challenge. What do you use? Also, we're built on Salesforce, and we use Salesforce internally. So you have things like Chatter and all of that. So all of a sudden you have all of these different communication streams. And the whole point of this communication technology was to simplify how you're going to communicate. So if you don't have an overall vision of saying, okay, what's in the best interest for everyone in the company, you can quickly get yourself siloed into everyone's using different communication tools, and now no one's effectively talking with each other.
Yeah, I think, it's a great point. You've got a million different ways to communicate. Everyone kind of is in love with their own, like you said, particular silo or their method, and there can, despite the interconnectivity, there can be a breakdown in communication. But I think it's a very powerful example of being aligned for the greater good, knowing where the real value is going to be coming out of when you're making that decision to buy a new type of business software. So that makes a lot of sense.
It hits on some of the other points where, the driving underlying theme to all of this is you really have to understand and know what you want and why you want it. Otherwise, you can get persuaded by, this VP of Tech who says, look at all the cool stuff Slack can do, or, your internal team that says, no, we put everything in Salesforce, so let's just use Chatter or whatever. You've got to really decide on, what is a must-have and why do you need it? And that's your driving message from leadership down to say, here's the box we need to play in. Let's make sure we stick in this. And then you can start to sell me on all the features and benefits that may help make the decision. But if you don't have that guiding principle, it's just too difficult to stay on track.
Getting a little distracted by all the shiny bells and whistles. So,
yeah.
All right, let's talk about number 3 then, knowing what's easily configurable and what's not.
Yeah, and this actually ties beautifully into, number 4, which is, are you hearing yes too often?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a very strong believer in an 80-20 rule when it comes to software, especially when you're looking at large enterprise or business software where, these software providers, us included, make it very easy to customize and modify and configure and make changes that are unique to your business. But there's also a level of responsibility that I think that comes with that, where you need to keep things under control. And I really feel that when you buy a software, it should at least meet 80% of what the need is. And then it's nice to have up to a 20% flexibility. I can tell you, from experience with Talent Rover, out of the gate, we did not do a really great job of controlling the conversation with clients as to, don't over customize, don't over engineer, don't over automate. And it burned us a few times, and it definitely burned the clients of, by the time they were done, and I remember this vividly, I had one of our clients, their CEO, who I know really well, and who speaks really frank with me, called me and said, look, you sold me a dream, and now I have a Frankenstein. And the things they don't like are really the overly engineered, highly customized things. So we actually went back and did a whole new deployment without doing all the customizations, and now they love what they bought. Yeah. We failed as a software company with controlling our client and explaining why doing all of those customizations was such a bad thing. Mm-hmm. So really diving in and having the vendor be able to show you, you can configure this, you can't configure this, and for the things that you can't configure, being able to explain why. I think a really important question when it comes to configuring and customization is tell me about your upgrade path. Tell me if I make all of these changes, what happens in future releases? Am I still going to be upgradable? And really making some of that decision based off of that, because if you overly engineer something, then chances are when the software company comes out with something new and great, you may not be able to take advantage of it.
Well, and we've had a handful of guests on the show, and this idea of how much flexibility as a business do you get into when it comes to that customization, and you want to obviously provide the customer with the best possible product, service, whatever it is that you do. So you want to be able to take into consideration their individual needs, but balancing that against, well, this is what we do very well. Consider what our process when you're thinking about customization, because we have a lot of expertise. We can tell you why maybe this is a better idea, while at the same time listening again to their individual needs. I think it definitely comes down to a little bit of communication, and that was one thing that you just talked about, sort of like talking to the client about what is going on, what is getting customized, and what maybe doesn't need to, so you don't end up with, as you said, a Frankenstein instead of a dream.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's really the vendor being able to know what really is going on in your space and what's needed. And if they do, then they're really understanding why their software is doing what it does. Like, we've grown at a crazy rate. We've grown 2,800% over the past 3 years. And, Inc. just ranked us as the ninth fastest growing software company in America. And the reason why we've grown is, one, we really understand the space, but, we try not to have egos. We try to really always listen to what customers are saying, because we have the advantage of selling into one industry. So the customers are going to tell us way more than we could ever think of ourselves. What then becomes our responsibility, which ties back into the same type of philosophy around the 80-20 rule, is it's great for a customer to say, hey, Talent Rover should really do this. And we go, you know what? Talent Rover should really do that, but we're going to solution it. We're going to come up with a way for Talent Rover to do that fits into the overall philosophy of the product, versus having a customer say, make it do X, Y, and Z, which may be such a disconnect from everything else. So a vendor that understands the industry really well and who listens to what's going on can, I think, have results like we've had with this insane growth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it sounds a little bit like you're like, with that open line of communication with a customer, you can find out, what are you trying to accomplish at the end of the day? Like, you ask for these certain customizations, but what's the purpose? And with that communication, you can have a dialogue about, well, maybe that's, this would be our recommendation instead of the over customization. If this is the goal that you're looking to accomplish, we can help you get there. And this is how we recommend doing it. So I think that's also an important distinction. And Brandon, we sort of knocked 3, 4, and 5 out with that one last question. 5 being the result of hearing yes too often is this idea of over customization and why to be wary of that. Was there anything that we didn't touch on with those 5 points that you wanted to mention?
I think the point number 4, are you hearing yes too often, is a big one. you don't want to be told, yes, it can do everything under the sun, even though it can. Like I look at our technology and the fact that we're built on Salesforce, we can pretty much do almost anything, which it's a crazy statement to make, but we have the technology advantage of that Salesforce engine under us.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that doesn't mean we can do everything easily. We can do everything right. We can do everything for free. We can, we really understand everything. So saying yes too much starts to paint this picture that you have this magical solution that is going to do everything. And then it's going to just lead to a challenge between, you and the customer later when it really doesn't, and you're setting some false expectations. So whenever I'm purchasing not just software, but anything complicated, I like for when a vendor says, no, let me tell you why we don't do that, and get into the specifics so I understand it. Because hearing yes too often, do I really believe now what you're telling me, or are you just trying to get me to purchase? So a good share of no's is always healthy.
Yeah. I mean, at least you're not just getting told what you want to hear. So that's a very healthy perspective. Now, Brandon, again, as you said, you're running the ship of one of the fastest growing software companies in the US right now. And we had prompted you before we started recording, but we have been asking a lot of our current guests, what is kind of the legacy that you're hoping to leave behind? And this can be, of course, related professionally, personally, or a combination of the two.
Yeah, I chuckled when I knew this question was coming. I try to be a guy that doesn't have a big ego, and focusing on a legacy is just something that's not normal for me. I think what I do focus on, the basics of are we making the right decisions? Are we doing the right things? Really expecting more out of myself and more out of those that I work with. And then I think the biggest thing for me is to always think bigger, always be pushing, always saying, can we do something better, bigger, faster, all of that than what we're doing today? So I think, if those things all align, then whatever my legacy ends up being will be acceptable to me. But that's where I'm focused.
That's fantastic. Well, again, we've been talking with Brandon Metcalf, the co-founder and president of Talent Rover. Brandon, if anyone in our audience wants to connect with you after today's episode, they're interested in finding out more about Talent Rover, they want to talk more about today's topic, they want to connect with you personally, what's the best way for them to go about doing that?
Yeah, I'm a huge LinkedIn advocate, so finding me on LinkedIn is probably the easiest way. Of course, you can go to talentrover.com, or I am on Twitter as well, so I can be found there.
Perfect. Well, Brandon, thank you again so much for your time today. It really was a pleasure having you on the show.
All right, Jonathan, thanks so much.
There are lots of ways to build a community, and we've chosen to build the B2B Growth community through this podcast. But because of the way podcasts work, it's really hard to engage with our listeners. And without engagement, it's tough to build a great community. So here's what we've decided to do. We're organizing small dinners across the country with our listeners and guests. No sales pitches, no agenda, just great conversations with like-minded people. We'll talk business, we'll talk family, we'll talk goals and dreams. We'll build friendships. So if you'd like to be a part of a B2B Growth dinner in a city near you, go to b2bgrowthdinners.com. That's b2bgrowthdinners.com. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.